Welcome to another episode of Time Extend. This is a very special episode, a very different episode. But before we get into that, who is joining me today?
It is Brendan Morrison, and we're here again with a bit of deja vu, I suppose, because for unforeseen circumstances, we're going to be talking about R Racing Evolution once more. But now we're doing it live on Twitch, and I'm not sure if that's a net positive, Adam, or it's a negative, because we spent an hour and a half on a Saturday morning, incredibly early for you, discussing Reyna and Gina and all of those guys in that game.
I forgot. Yeah, we record that one very, very early. So the background to this is about 2 weeks ago, we recorded the R Racing Evolution episode that unfortunately is lost to the ages. It disappeared somewhere in the annals of Google Drive. Which is probably where Ridge Racer, the franchise, is as well. And it was very upsetting because a lot of people like R Racing Evolution. It's a fun game to talk about. Even if you don't like it, it's a fun game to talk about, and it has its cult following. And we knew that we couldn't just not do the R Racing episode. It's a meme at this point. So we wanted to still do it, but we didn't just want to re-record the podcast because that's never fun. And we actually haven't really ever lost an episode before, but it just, it's not an off-the-cuff, fun experience. So we thought we would use it as an opportunity to do a live show, the first live show we've ever done. We've done streams before, but the objective with this one is that we are going to take the episode after it's done, put it on the regular podcasting channels and airwaves where you can listen to it normally. But for those of you that are here now that are watching, you get to see our lovely faces, and you also get to make comments and questions and things in the chat, and we'll be just addressing those, I think, over time as we talk about the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anytime that we talk about something that maybe is a slight bit controversial or just things people have a lot to say on, and this is one of those games where that's the case, we'll just check what the chat is and kind of overlay that into it. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfected, totally understood format, but it's something that we'll get through. And I mean, I can already see guys like QXC are there, so we're going to hear what he has to say regardless of how much we acknowledge it. So it's we've got a good night ahead of us, I think.
Yeah, and R Racing, I think that's why this is a great first episode to do live too, because this game, man, I mean, Fernando's here in the chat, friend of the show, Fernando Moutinho. He loves R Racing Evolution, big fan of R Racing Evolution, and I'm sure there are others here as well. And we have to make sure though, when we read some of the comments and stuff, we have to make sure we read them, because people are going to be listening to this episode, so we can't just react without acknowledging what the message was in the first place. I'm thinking a lot about that, and I feel like I'm going to screw it up at some point.
Nah, mate, it'll be tough, but we'll get there. And I suppose just to kick things off as well, obviously to kind of talk about this game, I did revisit it. I think we both did, obviously, to get a feel for the way it was like, and to just basically try to refresh our memories, because I know for me it's a game that I haven't properly got into since I played through it the first few times when I was a lot younger. I think it was, must have been 13 or 14 at the time when this game came out, if that, maybe slightly younger. And yeah, it's interesting because when I thought back to the game, I thought on it pretty fondly, and I even felt the story and stuff was compelling enough, especially for a racing game. What I found going back to it now is that I just didn't really hold up as well as I wanted it to. That's what's really kind of struck me. I went to this game hopeful that it was going to kind of capture the imagination and make me say, well, this is exactly what we should be seeing now in terms of where the technology is. Maybe this is something that can be revisited, improved upon. But I think the reality for me was that it was very much an exercise in mediocrity in some aspects, but then also it has that underlying kind of Namco charm that's there. I'm still glad it exists from the perspective of it being pretty fucking random, all things considered. And I always feel as if it's cheating to bring it up, but obviously the presentation and style are also fantastic and timeless. But what I found from the actual kind of gameplay perspective and the main kind of crux of the game was an experience that was probably a bit more of a letdown than my tinted glasses had led on when I was thinking back on the game before going back and actually playing it.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. I first played this game, I think I got it for Christmas 2003, which would have been my 10th birthday. And it had come out, or 10th birthday, I would have been 10 years old. And it had come out December 9th in the US. It'd come out like a couple days or like a week or two earlier in Japan. And it didn't come out in Europe until April of the following year. So, this game came out right, I think it was about that point, like Gran Turismo 3 had been out for 2 years, over 2 years, and people are starting to get antsy about the next, sim racer on the console, because, this was a time before Forza. You pretty much only have like Sega GT. All the Model East that came and went, people didn't really like that. And the big thing about R-Racing Evolution, or R-Racing as it was known when it came out in Europe, is that this game was multi-platform, which was a really big deal because, PS2 Xbox racing game, okay, but like on GameCube, for this to be obviously by today's standards not realistic at all, but for like 2003 standards, a reasonably realistic racing game on the GameCube is a pretty big win for people who had a GameCube. And I played the game on Xbox, but if I often think that like if I only had a GameCube, I couldn't play Gran Turismo, I couldn't play anything else, I probably would have just like clung to R-Racing for dear life because it was serving a market that just wasn't there.
I think as well, when you think about what R-Racing offers from a pure driving point of view, it's such a wide spectrum that it does feel like that kind of condensed Gran Turismo experience. I suppose content-wise, you would have it comparable to the concept titles perhaps, in the sense that you've got these different disciplines represented. You have quite a good varied car list, which obviously we'll get on to later, but you've not only got the kind of newer cars at that time, but there's also some really cool retro inclusions in there as well, and then some pretty crazy race cars as well that we wouldn't see in any other games. So in terms of the experience it offers from that kind of driving perspective as well, it's not as if GameCube owners would feel shortchanged in terms of what that driving experience should be like if it's good. It's just that with that being the only option, I suppose you would have still loved to have something equivalent like the way Xbox had and the way PlayStation obviously had. But I think from a GameCube owner's perspective it would have been interesting. And for me, I played on PlayStation 2, so a wealth of racing titles there, but obviously seeing the Namco branding and the interesting marketing, we'll say, of the game as well. It was a surefire pick up just to see exactly what it was about. And there's one thing I will say, like even going back to it now, it definitely has that kind of impact and style that you would hope a game of this type would have. I feel as if when we talk about racing games that are primarily based around some sort of career or story, they can try too hard to maybe keep it vested in reality or very simplistic. But the cool thing about R-Racing is it seems to tap into that kind of Ace Combat type storytelling equivalent for racing games, and it's just interesting because right off the bat it grabs you from that perspective of this is going to offer something that's a bit different to what else is out there beyond being a fucking simcade from the Ridge Racer creators, which is obviously something that is a selling point on its own.
Yeah, I remember reading an interview with one of the main designers on this game. It was on IGN, and I can't remember the dude's name, and I think it's still on IGN. I think you can still find it, but he said something to the effect of like, we wanted to do a more realistic racing game, but we knew that we couldn't compete with Gran Turismo in the sense of content, in the sense of, having so many cars, having so many tracks, having physics that were that advanced. So we decided to kind of go off in our own direction to differentiate ourselves, and our way of doing that was with the narrative, which is a very Namco way to do things. I mean, it's one of the reasons that, among many reasons that R4 is so beloved, is because it kind of built this world, and R4 had sort of a weak narrative around it. So, I think that's really cool. I think it's the kind of thing that I wish was like more of a factor in games today. I suppose we're kind of seeing it make a return with like Breaking Point in Formula One. But this game was very controversial at the time, as controversial as I guess it could be, given it's such a niche type title. But for being Namco's first racing game in a long time, that wasn't, I guess, MotoGP, to really deviate from arcadey Ridge Racer style drifting and all that stuff, to come out and make a realistic racing game like this. And I remember it was such a big deal, and the game was, I don't want to say failure because it's not like I have numbers out in front of me, but the game was not a critical success, to put it mildly. But it was so off-putting to fans that when they teased Ridge Racer for the PSP, I believe, there was a trailer that said original drift handling, and I think they used that phrase again for Ridge Racer 6 on the Xbox 360 because they knew that they have kind of strayed away from what people expected of them, which I think it's unfortunate because we don't know where the series could have gone with another entry, if the handling could have been a little bit better, if the game could have had a more fleshed out track roster because it was really low on the tracks. I think it's just a matter of Namco really only had the resources to make like one of these games at a time, and it just tried this experiment with the realism or something that was relatively more realistic, and it just wasn't. It's funny because like I think it was what the market wanted, but just not from them.
Yeah, exactly, and it's one of these type of kind of experimental titles you probably wouldn't see nowadays either. I feel as if that kind of the development cost to time ratio in the kind of PS2, Xbox, GameCube era seemed to be that perfect sweet spot for some of the more experimental shit that we've seen. And it's one of those ones where as we move into the HD generation, the kind of cost of making games skyrockets, so you start to see maybe a little bit of that experimental nature from those not kind of bankrolled directly by the console manufacturers fade away, and as a result you don't see as much crazy shit, because I think that's why the PS2, Xbox and GameCube era is so well regarded, because it was just like the perfect time for those AA type games, and for Namco that gave them the perfect time to experiment a title like this, because if it was the kind of mental success that maybe they could have hoped it could be, it could have been an interesting side series to Ridge Racer. And I mean, to be brutally honest, it's not as if the Ridge Racer series flourished that much past this point. I mean, in our heart of hearts, we still seen it as that fantastic series, but if you were to go back and look at the historical releases from that point, there was definitely that downward trajectory of reused assets and a very similar gameplay experience. So I think that's why R Racing in itself is pretty interesting, because it was probably, I mean, what Ridge Racer title came after this? Would it be Ridge Racer 6 on the Xbox 360? Or, yeah, would be, wouldn't it? Or with the PSP games?
It would be a PSP ones,
right.
And then, Ridge Racer 6. And then I guess the DS one, if you want to count that.
Yeah, so, I mean, at that point, I suppose you can see that parallel of Namco kind of playing it safe, and they know what Ridge Racer fans like, and they know people will buy these games. They might not blow them away, but on PSP at least it's a technical showcase, which is fantastic. But if you kind of look at what our Racing Evolution was trying to achieve, it's almost trying to actually do what some of these games like Gran Turismo and the Sega GT and stuff couldn't do. That type of kind of Japanese flair to storytelling, that they can make a gamble on that because this is an entirely new series. And the end result is pretty middling in terms of the success of the actual game, but in terms of how it's regarded by racing fans, I still think it's got that little bit of a legacy.
Yeah, I think I remember this game fondly because, to speak more at least about my personal feelings on it, does it handle fantastically well? No. Does it have a ton of content that keeps you coming back and like a really engaging like career or anything like that? No. But it's just, it is Namco, I think, at the very tail end of Namco's like height of just masterful style. And whether you're talking about the music, whether you're talking about the UI, Even graphically, it's not tour de force, but the game just looks good in just a very clean way. Like the car select screen is beautiful. It just like shows you the car from like a below perspective, and even when you go to the garage, you can like turn on lights and I actually recently just streamed the game in our Discord like last weekend, so I was playing around with this and just like marveling at how good everything looked and how shiny everything looked. And the soundtrack's incredible. I mean, the soundtrack for my money is I think maybe the second best in the series, and I include, you know, all the Ridge Racer games in that. I would really only put R4 above it. You know, maybe have it on the level of with Rage Racer. It is a really, really fantastic soundtrack. So all of those beats that you would expect from Ridge Racer and from Namco on the style side are there. It's just unfortunately wrapped in a game that has a story that's a joke, if we're being honest, and has physics that, you know, are just very odd, because as I'm sure a lot of people who have played these games have noticed, the handling, the assets, and just the way the game moves is very reminiscent of Namco's MotoGP games, which is something I actually never realized until I played MotoGP 3 last year, and I was like, yeah, this feels like R Racing. And now I understand why the cars in R Racing shake, like they like fidget and like move around, and they're like airlines and stuff, because like those are all like callbacks to like or are all like kind of baked into MotoGP. It's really interesting, and I mean even the UIs are similar, like and I think two of the tracks, Suzuka and Phillip Island, are carried over from MotoGP. So Namco is definitely like trying to make this easy for themselves in as much as like be able to use what they already had to make a simulation type racing game in the most expedient way. But even then, I have to imagine it's gotta be a mess, like putting cars in a bike racing game.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, why didn't we just get the bikes as well, man? Know what I mean? Fucking hell, like if Reina can go from an ambulance to a Fiat 500 with a fucking 16-litre engine or whatever the shit that thing had, I don't see why she probably couldn't fucking diverge into MotoGP as well. Maybe that was the sequel.
Yeah. So I think at this point we should just talk about the story, because I think that's really what people are coming for. And to be honest, I remember when we tried to do this episode the first time, I told you, like, I just played through the game. I've played through the game actually kind of like 1.5 times since since like last month, because I was first playing it on the PS2, and then I decided to try to emulate it via Dolphin, and it looks really good upscaled, and so I found myself doing the career mode again. And for the life of me, I can't even remember what happens. Like, it is so... it's so simple, but it's also just like... just so kind of... just... It is a story that is only there, I feel like, to check a box. And like they do the CGI, and the CGI looks really good. But yeah. It's, let's be honest, Reina's on the box of this game for a very specific purpose, and most of the scenes of her and Gina in the cutscenes in the game in the career mode or in the story mode are there for a very specific purpose. And I guess that was supposed to be, in addition to the story, maybe I guess that was the story that was supposed to differentiate R Racing Evolution from Gran Turismo.
Well, I mean, they definitely hit on the story, I suppose, and the story, sorry, about how it's like impossible for a woman to be a racing driver. Apparently, it's something that certainly Eddie in the story doesn't stand for. The prick's prick, as I like to call him. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about this game. It kind of wants to have its cake and eat it in terms of being like, here is the struggles of the main character, which are true and valid, but we're going to frame it in such an obnoxious way that it really does become insufferable when one of said characters who holds this prejudice is then given the happy ending of starting a racing team with Reina and fuck now, what's the mentor guy called?
Stefan,
yeah. So like Eddie's like, I've got this racing team idea. I think it's going to work out. It's going to be fantastic. And he gets the chance to even field this idea. because he becomes friends. Does he become friends with Reina? I don't know. Reina drives for him, and he acts like a dick the entire time. So it's one of these interesting things where there's some good ideas in there, but the execution is so fucking all over the place that it's very it's very hard to take it seriously, because it's a simplistic story. Yes, I feel as if it was handled with a little bit more tact, it'd be good. And I know we're adding on this kind of 2000s Japanese game tax to the things where it's going to be a bit crazy and it's going to be over the top, which is fine. But I feel as if it's one of these things where none of the characters are likeable in any capacity in this game, and from my perspective anyway, the entire time I'm playing it, I'm just like, what is going on here? Like, Reina's pretty much a blank slate, so she qualifies as likeable, I suppose, but it's not
they all are, they all are. And the gist of it is she's an ambulance driver, and I guess there's an accident at the race, and so she's then like picking up this driver who was in the accident. Stefan's in the car because Stefan runs a team, and Stefan's like, hey, you really got something, and she ends up racing for Stefan. Stefan is part of a team that is owned by a cabal of sorts, which really just reminds me of like those shadowy figures that like control the world in Evangelion. And they basically, like, every time you see them, they're like, you don't even see them. It's just like a bunch of black shadowy figures in like a dark room and a gigantic blue screen. And they're involved in match fixing and betting on encouraging people to bet on their races and then throwing the races, which is something that happens to you in your career. It really feels like it wants to be this thing about like this deeper message about politics and the love of sport mixed in with misogyny and all of that, and it just ends up like just throwing these like little tidbits in there. And it really is, it doesn't make any points. And, to their credit, maybe they weren't trying to make any points, but it just all feels really flat, really flimsy. And, I think the voice acting too, which I guess could be worse, but whoever they have doing Reina's English voice acting she is very, I don't know. There's one point I remember distinctly where she literally says, like, I suppose I should have been more shocked by the association with high stakes gambling. And like she literally says like what's going on in the moment, like purely to service the viewer, the player. And it is totally just surface level, take things at face value. Everything's right there for you. And I think that's why, like, we talk about this and you wouldn't expect anything else, from a racing game at this time and from what our racing's trying to do. But I think playing it today, it really, it hasn't aged well, to say the least. Yeah,
I mean, the story is written from the perspective of what seems to be kind of Namco story directors sitting in a room, and they come up with 4 bullet points on the whiteboard. And then the big boss man rushes in and he's like, okay, what's our story? And he's like, right, okay, so ambulance driver becomes racing driver. Fantastic, great. There's betting going on in this world and it controls teams and ruins the sport. And we're going to have somebody who objects to all of that because they're a normal human being. Okay, that's great. We have a Fiat 500 powered by the engine from a Lamborghini Diablo. Alright, fair enough. And then the last point was just, and shower scene, because it's a game from that era and we need to have it, and our main character is a female, so we don't want to put any depth in there whatsoever.
Also, they have to make her rival another female racing driver, because they have to have 2 women compete, because they can't be friends and gang up on everyone else. They have to compete, because that's the only thing that's allowed in this world. So yeah, it really does hit on a lot of tropes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't really elaborate on them, which is fair enough. I mean, it's very surface level, and if that's what they're going for, then fine. And I think it's this type of kind of racing world that's there, and the universe it kind of flimsily sets up does allow, especially when I was younger playing it, like your kind of imagination can almost fill in the blanks of what's not being explicitly told, and you can make up more about that world and basically make it suit whatever narrative that you want. And I mean, at that point in time, it was like the fucking height of like fan fiction and shit like that. So I can only imagine for anybody who had an interest in kind of making up their own characters or making up their own plots and shit, like a game like R-Racing Evolution would just suit that down to the T.
I've seen so many like deviant arts of like Reyna in another like set of overalls or something like that, or like, I don't know, Reyna on McLaren or something. It really did have this like crossover appeal with like budding internet culture, I guess. But I'm just being reminded of like some of my favorite moments in the career, and this is one I told you about, but it's towards the end when like it's after Eddie's introduced and they're doing the race at like the privateer race, which is just old cars. That's all it means. And you know, I think Stefan's like, Reyna, you do this race. GVI would never let us have like a nice race like this. They would be trying to, you know, control it and make it terrible and suck the life out of it. But this is after Eddie has kind of come into the story, and Eddie's like, I need to talk to Stefan. Which like Eddie also is like, fuck you, you're a woman. And then once Reyna mentions Stefan's name, he's like, you know Stefan? So that's really
so bang on.
so that's a whole thing that happens. But then what I love about is when you're in this race, driving like a Giulia or whatever, Stefan comes over the radio, because Stefan and other characters, because you can hear other drivers in this world over your radio, they all talk to you. And Stefan comes over the radio on like lap 2 and like, Reyna, Eddie has come to me with a very interesting business opportunity. I think he wants to start his own team. We'll talk after the race. And I just imagine, like, can you imagine, like, Christian Horner over the radio, like, fucking Max Verstappen, and tell him about this bullshit when, like, man's just trying to drive? Like, oh my god, that cracked me up. I had totally forgotten about it until I played the game again.
And is it like the only time like something external to what's happening in the race is communicated as well? So it's like nothing else has ever come up on the radio that isn't related to the race in hand. But that proposition from Eddie was so fucking good. Like Stefan had to go on the mic and tell Reyna. But I love that you used Christian Horner for that example, because that does sound like something he would try and do, to be honest.
Max, Helmet has, I can't do Christian Horner, but you know what I'm going for. Yeah, it's just, and I love that that's how the radio works in this universe, is everyone gets to talk to each other. And I mean, we even talked about the pressure system, but it's basically you drive behind someone long enough until their meter fills up and then they spin out, or they just forget to brake, which is very funny. I think Corvette Evolution GT had that too around this time, which is another PS2 era racing game. And when you're like tailing another driver, they'll come up on your radio, and some of them just have absolutely ridiculous responses. They're just like, 76, because they can't call you by your name because you're a woman. 76 is out of control. She's gonna kill someone. And it's like, they're driving like there's like 2 car lanes between you and them. Like, is this not why you're here to race? Like, they're not a maniac. They're just fucking sharing a track with you. Like, it's hilarious how the other drivers just like freak the fuck out, and that always produces a laugh too.
Yeah, I don't get it. Like you're saying, we're there to race anyway. So here's me adhering to the driving line, braking when I need to, completing very smooth overtakes. But you'd think I'd fucking killed the guy in the radio's family the way he's going on. 76, how could you do this? I don't get it, man. And the actual pressure system itself, it's a cool gimmick. Like, part of me would have loved for this game to exist in the kind of online multiplayer era, because can you imagine the fucking salt online if they kept like a pressure system like that for versing other people in races? Was there split screen in this game? Actually,
I think there was, but I don't think the pressure system applies to it. But I think a way that you could do the pressure system with other actual players is maybe like when you're being followed by someone, have your vision start to like get blurry or shake or something like that, or people would fucking hate it. The game would have gotten absolutely panned if they tried that, but that could be a fun way to do it. I think it's one of those things that's mostly applicable to AI. And hey, I mean, again, it served to differentiate the game, right? It served to make it a little bit different than everything else out there, and it is really silly. And to be honest, this game is so easy regardless of it. I mean, I guess it makes it easier, but like when you're doing the campaign, this game is just such a it's just a walk. It's a walk in the park. It's a piece of cake. I think the event challenges tend to be a little bit harder when you do like the races and you go up against people and you win their cars. But even those aren't that difficult. No part of this game is especially hard, and it's it's funny that the pressure system is in there. It gives it a little bit of personality, but also just like allows you to pass somebody just by following them, essentially, not even having to like really execute a move.
Mate, I've played many racing games, and overtaking someone is the most disrespectful thing you can do. Like, if you never heard the reaction to another racing driver when you overtake them, I mean, I don't know, maybe I've been playing these racing games wrong, but our Racing Evo's taught me that you're an absolute psycho if you try and get past somebody.
I mean, that's why Formula 1 is set up the way it is, because passing is disrespectful. So they set up to make a formula where passing never happens, ever. At least among the top 3 cars.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Or the dedicated sections of the track where you're allowed to overtake as well.
Yeah, where you're allowed to pass, yeah.
Exactly, mate, exactly. But it's the actual on-track driving experience for me is just very uninspired. Like a lot of things in the game, it just feels a little bit kind of half-arsed in a way, in the sense that it doesn't really have enough personality when you're driving without the pressure system for it to feel memorable enough, and then the pressure system feels a bit too simplistic to really actually make a tangible impact on how the game feels. It's fine. Like you're saying, because of those kind of MotoGP routes that are there is definitely a kind of oddness to the handling. It makes it unique. I just don't think it's really like uniquely fun in that sense. I think it's more like tolerable, and because the career mode is that easy as well. Personally speaking, I've never kind of pushed the game's physics to the limits of seeing what it's like to drive on the edge, I suppose, because you never really have to do that anyway. And there's no time trial challenges or anything like that in here either, is there? Like outside of the kind of.
I think there might be some event challenge thing, but
okay, cool.
I will say the game doesn't handle great, but it gets a lot better if you played it, I think, on an Xbox, because the triggers make. Because this game actually, when you turn off the traction control, the cars actually they do have a tendency to spin and slide, and having that little the extra dimension of throttle control is really important. So like, for example, when I played the game on the PS2, which is technically a PS3, but same difference. The analog buttons don't obviously give you enough range of motion to really be able to execute like good throttle control. So the game feels pretty terrible that way. But when I then went to go play on my computer, playing through Dolphin but using a DualSense, it felt a lot better. And it didn't feel amazing, but it felt tolerable, which is, I think good enough for me to kind of enjoy the game a little bit. But obviously, as you say, it's the experience of racing is so bland. The cars are spread so far apart. The close racing is non-existent. Everyone's a pushover, and even the engine sounds. I'm not a person who likes to complain about engine sounds as much as everyone else do, but like, oh my god, all the cars in this game sound the same, and they all sound like basically I feel like the sounds. I think somebody in Discord said the sounds were carried over between like Ridge Racer games. So that just goes to show you, like, it's not a visceral experience. This is like, imagine the total opposite of like the first Grid, and and that's what our Racing Evolution feels like to play.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where the kind of clarity and crispness of the graphics, I suppose, kind of work well in that sense that the driving isn't very visceral, because it does have that kind of very clean aesthetic look to it that probably suits a kind of slower, more kind of approachable driving experience. And really, there's no cars here that will pose anybody any sort of challenge, really, in terms of just trying to understand how they should drive and what to do. So I found the whole experience, I don't know if this is a positive, very, very standard and unified overall. Like there just
classic
really
7 out of 10 racer.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. Like, it's very easy to get sidetracked with all these negative points and rip the terrible story to shreds because it deserves to be. But at the same time, it's like, as a package, it's just so unique that if you are in this Twitch stream just now or listening to the podcast uploaded afterwards, then you know fine well you've either played this game or you might be interested in it now if you've somehow avoided it, because it offers something that you just couldn't readily source that was out there. The only other kind of story-driven racing games at the time outside of what Codemasters were doing pretty decently was like fucking Driven. Is that Driven, the film?
Well, you know what?
Game as well.
I remembered that the Toka Race Driver games did have their story. Although, the thing about the Toka Race Driver games is that they were a lot more... That was more like live the life of a racing driver, right? That was more like, you know... Yeah. Your first-person camera, you're talking to that Scottish dude, and yeah, it wasn't like a movie. Like, our racing is trying to be a movie, and it's obviously not a very good one. But yeah,
I think we said this when we were talking about it offline as well. But for me, the biggest challenge is that you want to tell this movie story type Hollywood affair, but you've chosen closed circuit racing to base it around, so you lose a lot of that kind of drama and flair and family that you can bring in for street racing and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And the problem with our racing is it kind of wants to have its cake and eat it, so it still wants to have the corruption elements, but it wants to blow up to high heavens. It wants to have the whole, oh my god, is that a woman driving a race car thing going on, but then also make it so those people that said those things are part of our crew at the end. And then kind of crucially as well, there are various parts of the story where they reference these kind of like exhibition race events that not many people know about, but it can be held at Suzuka with an entire fucking pit crew per team.
We gotta talk about that Fiat 500 too, but I'll let you finish.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, we'll get there. But I was just going to kind of cap off by saying like that whole hidden exhibition tournament that Stefan got us the crucial invite for takes place in like 4 different tracks that are incredibly different geography wise, and the people that run the tracks and stuff must just be like, there come them racing teams again for some reason. Yeah. Who knows what's happening there?
Shutting down Monaco again.
Exactly, that's it. So it's one of those odd ones where, you know what, it isn't trying to be real life anyway, so it's not as if it's a deal breaker, but it's just funny because when they want to play the politics card, they can, but a lot of the story kind of beats are definitely vested in that area of, if this was an official organisation, that shit wouldn't have happened. So it's picking, like, I'm picking stupid shit out here, but it's just, when you play the game, it doesn't really do any sort of job to invest you in that universe beyond what's kind of shown at face value on the screen, and you know what, that's fine. Like, that's obviously what they were going for, or what the time constraints allowed, perhaps. So ultimately for me, it is that 7 out of 10 category across the board, but the story itself, like, don't come into this expecting to be like, oh shit, why are more racing games not doing this? If our racing is the bar, then I mean, it should be fairly easy to clear, because all you need to do is flesh out 1 or 2 of the half-arsed plot points throughout, and you've probably got something a lot more tangible and fun to play.
Yeah, I think you can sum this game up, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring up the Fiat 500, is because like there is an event where Stefan just tells you to drive this Fiat 500 that's been souped up to go up against like GT 500 and like, you know, Le Mans race cars, Le Mans GT cars, like the McLaren F1 GTR and shit like that. This race at Suzuka, and you know, this car has like 300 horsepower, but it's Fiat 500, so it weighs nothing. And the game's very easy, so you still win the race. But this Fiat 500, like, it It is introduced for this event. It never comes up again. You're never told why you're driving this car. It just comes and goes, and it means nothing. And it's like almost seems like they were trying to reference like Ridge Racer games in the past that had you drive some like wimpy kind of car, like the Soldat Remur, or like the Pac-Man car, or like the Wild Gang, or like the Eriso from Ridge Racer. But they don't like. And I guess if you play those games, you get it. But even then, it's like this is a different universe, so why? And also, like the Fiat 500, it doesn't have any modifications to it, exterior-wise. So like they could give it a really cool like whatever that one Fiat 500 SS that had the crazy, I think the TCR Berlinetta or something like that, with the exposed engine cover and everything, and the huge wide body kit. They don't do that. So it's just like. They have these like quirky, neat ideas, but they're never fully explained. They're never fully understood, and they come and go so quickly that you don't even really recognize it. And that's really our Racing Evolution in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of these incredible turns the story takes with no rhyme or reason behind it. It just kind of throws it at you, and you know what? It is memorable. That's the thing. Like, but I think it's more memorable because it was so fucking random. Like, I would love to have known what the kind of background for it being included was, because ultimately there must have been a reason at some point, like that was just there. Like, I thought maybe Stefan was going to say, "Oh, I raced this when I was younger" or some shit like that. But
that would make sense. That would give you a story reason for it.
Yeah, but
well, I guess you can't see Twitch, right? You can see the chat?
Yeah, I can see the chat now, actually. So I'm just having a look at it now.
Because Chris, Racer XNFS, mentioned before you said that, sounds like a case of quick shove this car in there somewhere, the director says so. Which could very well be it. I think at this point we should probably go through the chat, because we said we were going to do that during the episode, and we kind of didn't, but it's fine. We'll make up for that now.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah.
So,
there's lots of comments in here about whether or not the pressure mechanic is good or not. But sorry, Brendan, continue.
No, I was going to call it what Jimmy NGX said. So apparently there were 62 unplayable cars in the game. Are those licensed cars, Jimmy, or is it like just? I hope it's Ridge Racer cars. It'd be fucking great if it's like fictional Ridge Racer cars, but.
Is that your friend Jimmy that likes to post random things? It might be.
Nah, mate, that isn't.
No, okay.
Don't worry. that would be funny though.
I think 62 unplayable cars. I wonder if they're like custom liveries and things, because this game has a lot of. It's got probably like 30, 40 some odd cars, and then the European version had a few extras, which are pretty cool. But it has a lot of interesting choices with the car roster, and one of the cool things is that there are different liveries for all the cars. The liveries are actually pretty sweet. Some of them are, especially for like the GT cars, some of them are real. Some of them are made up, but they're made up in the way that like Gran Turismo Sports like GR3 and GR4 liveries are, where they seem like factory liveries and they look really good. Some of the ones in this game, like I love the livery that is used for the Audi TT or the Toyota VM180, or the livery they have on the Alpha 147, I think, GTA, or 156 GTA. All look really good. So it just kind of adds this element of like these cars feel like they were like kind of looked after and designed, at least the liveries, by like the actual manufacturers, even though they probably weren't.
Yeah, and I think like in terms of the legacy, I suppose you could say, these liveries have. I know if you play like GT Sport, for example, you'll see quite a few of these recreated as well. So they did nail down that kind of fictional livery but real car type thing that Polyphony were fantastic at in Gran Turismo. I feel as if a lot of the ones here, they don't have that kind of issue of being over-designed, which you might see a lot of the time, or fairly basic replicas of cars but tweaking something so you don't get done for it trademark and copyright wise. It is pretty cool, some of the designs that we see here, and on the actual cars themselves as well. it's just the sheer variety is fantastic because you've got so many different car classes here. You've only got a certain amount of cars to work with because it's not as if it's like huge in terms of the content list, but they make it work. They really do, and even for strange events like the fucking the drag racing that appears once or whatever, they still have some kind of cool muscle cars in there for that. They've got some really cool rally car choices. I think one of my favourites, the Fiat Punto Super 1600. I think you said to me, Adam, that wasn't even in the US version, was it?
Yeah, no NTSC version for that one.
Yeah, so
yeah,
it's just interesting to see some of the choices in there because when I seen that choice, I was like, that's pretty inspired but random. So I wonder how late in development that was decided to add that, or what the reason was for it not actually being in the NTSC version.
Yeah, there were a couple cars like that. There was that one. There was the Ford Puma. There was Rough, I believe, and there was a TVR Cervera Speed 12. I think that's all of them. I might be missing one or two, but it's a shame because they're all cars I really think are cool, and I would have loved to see in all versions of the game. But they were missed out on some of them. This game also has the. I'm looking at the Internet Game Card Database right now. And this game also has a lot of oddities, like the first car you drive is a Pantera, is a De Tomaso Pantera. And then at the time before that car was really in any games. And then there's also the DeLorean, which you unlock through Event Challenge, which is very weird that's in this game. It has as much reason for being here. It probably has less reason for being here than the Fiat 500 does. But then some really cool stuff in here too, like the Advan Kondo Dome S101, which I tweeted about like a week or two ago because I think that car just looks incredible. And it was a prototype that competed in 24 Hours of Le Mans 1 year back then, and I don't think it did particularly well. But in this game, you can choose it as opposed to the Audi R8 or the Bentley Speed 8, which were much more successful Le Mans prototypes.
Yeah, exactly, but that one looks the best, so that gets my vote, mate.
Yeah, Jimmy adds there are some changes such as the description and some of the prize cars from NTSC are available in the car dealership in PAL, which is cool because you can buy cars with the money that you earn from races, or like the RP, I think is what the currency is called. But a lot of the times they're like the crappy liveries are in the dealership. Like for the Viper, it's that purple one, which I guess is kind of cool, but it's just like a purple Viper. Not much going on with the design there. And I think it's also interesting that the box art for this game too, that reminds me, is different in every region. Because in Japan they had the Pantera on the cover because the Pantera was kind of a big deal over there. In the US they had the Viper Competition Coupe, and it looks like a scale model. It does not look like a real Viper. And then in the PAL version, the most infamous of all is one of the most off-model McLaren F1 GTR longtails you have ever seen in your life, which is really funny because the model in the game isn't perfect, but it looks good, and it looks a hell of a lot better than the model on the box, which is like way more detailed, but completely disproportional.
Yeah, I wonder where that even came from. Like, do you think that was done by Namco in-house, or have they outsourced that and ended up with some Frankenstein McLaren effort?
Yeah, it's very, very strange. And Astronaut Gringo adds that in the Japanese version, it only showed the car. There was no Reina. So in Japan, they didn't need Reina to sell this game. But us Westerners are savages, and so I guess they did. So.
And then I'm pretty sure Gina appeared on the Ridge Racer DS cover, didn't she?
Yes.
She wasn't even given top billing on our Racing Evolution. I don't think she's even in Ridge Racer DS, is she? So that's
no, she's not. Because Ridge Racer DS is QXE, who's in our chat, knows, is massive fan of that game. Ridge Racer DS is just Ridge Racer 64 on the DS. So I think she's, if I remember correctly, because I played that game very briefly, and I think she's on the main menu too. She's like the background of the main menu, kind of like Reyna is for R Racing, except the DS has those two screens, right? So it's like you get twice the Gina. If that's something that you want.
Twice the Gina, what a quote, mate. Yeah. Somebody's going to clip you on that for sure.
QXE wants me to say, well, he didn't want me to say this, but I am not a fan of DS. All the tiny minor differences bug me a lot. I said you were a fan of 64, and DS is based on 64, whether we can admit that or not. I mean, it basically is.
And Ridge Racer is like a very lazy series, isn't it? There's like all these different releases that are basically the same content, and then the Ridge Racer DS just being Ridge Racer 64. But I suppose there was like Super Mario 64 on the DS as well, so maybe they were just following that trend.
Yeah, I think there were some really, I don't know if it was like, I mean, the hardware you would think would be geared. I think Nintendo, when they were working on the DS, were trying to make it as efficient as possible to port or to bring 64 games over to DS. So it was just natural. Especially those were back in the days where like Ridge Racer was launching every single console. It was on. It was there at launch for every single platform, and it wasn't up until the generation before the one that just started where that was no longer the case, because it was even there for the 360, which is just weird to think about.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
But wonder why Pantera is such a big deal in Japan. Hookseye says, I looked into this, and somebody said it was somebody I think in the Discord explained it, and I can't remember what they said, but I remember. Yeah, there's something there with the Pantera in Japan. There's some reason why they love it over there, and it's a very cool car. I actually saw one in person not that long ago, and unfortunately, because of my upbringing, that game is or that car is intrinsically tied to R Racing Evolution. It is just R Racing Evolution, like personified.
I'd love to have a copy of the Japanese version of the game just for that cover with the car on it, because it's a fucking work of art, man.
It's a cooler cover, and it's also I feel like Gran Turismo 4 also went for like the stark white cover, and GT4, I think the Japanese cover of that, where it just has the Gran Turismo logo and says the drive of your life, very understated, very minimalist. And GT4 came out after our Racing Evolution did, so maybe Namco would have a case on their hands.
Yeah, R Racing Evolution was the real inspiration for Kazunori's Gran Turismo series. That's just factual. We know that to be the case now since we've just confirmed it. So
I know Kaz has said in the past he doesn't really play other games. They're not relevant or whatever. But I'm willing to bet if Kaz played R Racing Evolution or knew about R Racing Evolution at the time, I feel like he would have said this game feels horrible, but is very, very attractive visually and stylistically. Because you look at that game, and then you look at like the massive glow up that like GT4 had, really after GT3, how it just seemed like there was a lot more care put into like the UI and stuff like that and the graphic design. I think Kaz is a secret fan of R Racing Evolution. I'm willing to make a bet on that. Don't ask me how much money though.
Well, mate, you put it out into the wild now. It wouldn't be the first time we broke a scoop on these streams, so this one should get traction, and maybe Kazunori will have to go on Twitter to debunk the rumours, especially he doesn't want GT7 being overshadowed by R Racing Evolution. You know what I mean? It puts him in a bit of a spot.
If Namco wants to ruin Sony's party, they have to remaster or remake R Racing Evolution, put that on the same day, put that on March 4th, 2022, and yeah, I think we'd have a real battle on our hands.
I think I know what game would sell the most out of those two, and it definitely doesn't start with an R.
Well, we're hitting the hour mark right now. We took about the first like 5 to 10 minutes of the show trying to set up the show, but I think at this point we've covered a lot. if there are any parting thoughts from you, Brendan. Meanwhile, those of you in the chat can get in your parting thoughts if you have any, and we'll just start to wrap it up here.
Yeah, so I mean, just from my perspective, then obviously go back and revisiting this one because I did have very fond memories of it from childhood. It's one of those ones that can really go either way, especially when it is a game that it doesn't have a kind of universally acclaimed reception. So I'd hoped it was going to be much like the GTI Club Super Manifesta situation, where going into that with kind of muted expectations of what I was actually going to play, it could only really exceed them. The issue was that once I actually had the copy and I booted it up, I had already kind of taken myself away from being hyped about it because I was remembering the times I'd had with it when I was growing up. All in all, it was a very forgettable experience returning to it. Obviously, I appreciate the presentation and style a whole lot. The car list is fantastic for its size. There's some really cool track choices in there as well, including Monaco, which, given how much of a nightmare that is to license, is pretty impressive to have there. But overall, I do think it's one of these games where you kind of play it for the impact it tried to have on the genre, more so than for a fantastic racing experience that you can rave about. For that reason alone, it is worth looking at, but from my perspective, it's not something I would kind of rush to return to. I think you've got those kind of meme-worthy elements like 76 and the shower scene and the Fiat 500 and GVI being this all-controlling eye in the background. Like, there's some funny stuff in there that gets frequently referenced in our Discord. But you know what? I'm glad it exists. This is what it always comes down to for me. I'm very rarely in a situation where I'm like, oh, I wish. Not a wish, but I wouldn't be too arsed if that didn't exist. What I find is when we visit these games, even when they're absolutely horrendous, like Sega GT, we always find something to go, you know what, that was a great idea. In that game, it was the kind of car creation tool, which was pretty wild and pretty cool to see. And in our Racing Evolution's case, it's that idea of taking like a Hollywood film type storytelling and trying to put it in a racing game. And yeah, you know what? Check it out if you've not played it somehow. And also revisit it if you've not went back for ages, because it's not going to blow you away, but it's not a huge time investment either. I think there's like fucking 15 minutes of cutscenes overall or something, so go check out for the races into that. It's like a 3-hour story or something, I think.
You can finish the campaign in like 3 hours, I feel like. Yeah, it really doesn't take very long. Yeah, you know, like it's one of those games. It's hard to explain why I enjoy playing it. I don't love our Racing Evolution. I don't think it's this like secret masterpiece like we found out GTI Club Super Manifesta was or anything like that. But I do feel like a sense of calm and just enjoyment playing it, and I think that's what draws me back to this game for some reason. You know, it's a classic thing I think that draws me back to a lot of Ridge Racer games in general. Is like even though I don't think like Rage Racer, for example, handles very well or is that fun to play, it's actually really maddening to play. The aesthetic, the visuals, the music, the cars, that all of the things that are sort of secondary to the experience make the experience worthwhile. I think our Racing Evolution is one of those games that survives on that. And to some people that might seem like it's like a weak way to kind of stake your claim, but you know, these days I don't see a lot of games that really hit the stylistic element the same way. So I think today, especially, even though some things like the story haven't aged very well, we can also say that there's no racing game out there right now that just kind of feels the way this one does, and I think it's important for that reason. But as I go through some of the comments here, Fernando has a challenge for the listeners and the chat and everybody here. He actually brought this up to me before. I challenge anyone to try and achieve gold on the event challenges RR Specialist event at Monaco. I remember, Fernando, I vaguely, and you can't respond because this is on Twitch, I vaguely remember you asking me if I like ever 100%ed all of the events in this game, and I was like, hell no, why would I ever do that? Because there's so many. The event challenge has like well over like 100 events. I'm like, I'm never gonna do that. You can't pay me enough to do that.
Mate,
I'm sure it's very difficult.
I totally forgot the event challenges were there. Like, I don't know how I managed to not see them when I was back playing it not so long ago.
Well, that's how you unlock like 70% of the cars in the game is through the event challenge. You can keep doing the story mode events over and over and over again. Each time you do, you unlock the car that you race them with. But if you want some of the secret ones, like I think the only way to get the McLaren F1 is through event challenge. The only way to get the DeLorean is through event challenge. I think the TVR and the PAL version's the same way.
Yeah. So,
yeah, the event challenge is definitely worth doing. That is the secret like meat of the game that they don't advertise until after. I'm almost surprised that there's nothing at the end of the story mode that says now go play event challenge.
Seems like the type of thing exactly. That would be there. It seems like that'd be a perfect kind of bouncing off point. You could even frame it as if that's what happens after the main storyline. Go check out the types of races and shit that Reina and co undertook after defeating the big bad GVI. But
we didn't talk about how they have to. Reina has to race to win the team's freedom.
Oh shit!
It's the final race of the game. Is you get into a Le Mans, an LMP1, and you have to race this guy with like a Dr. Doom voice. Around Motegi for 5 laps to win your freedom from GVI, because that is the way that it works in the racing world.
Absolutely. I always recall when a Formula 1 driver talks about moving teams and they're like, oh man, I was just enjoying my holiday in the off season, and then I get the call from Dr. Doom, we need to have a 1v1 race. What track in the Formula 1 calendar would be best for that? I don't know. Monaco. Go in Monaco. You can't move team unless you beat out a guy, because that's what happens.
Right. Fernando, obviously Codemasters, everyone there. Maybe slide a note under the door of the people who are writing for Breaking Point for F1 2022 and ask them to throw in a win your freedom race, or like a throw this race type of moment in the campaign. I think that would really make Breaking Point a lot more exciting and a lot more realistic, because obviously that's how racing works. Actually, what you could do is the player's character, like instead of Aiden or whatever, maybe they could be a former ambulance driver.
What an Easter egg that would be. Or like Admeister says in the chat, maybe Grid Legends has these little references that we're talking about here.
Yeah, Grid Legends has a story. It's big on story. It's probably gonna have a kick-ass story because it looks absolutely ridiculous. It's like the trailer, people are about to like punch each other like every 5 seconds. So yeah, I'm excited for that.
I'm excited for Grid Legends as well, mate. There'll be some interesting stuff there. Yep.
So I think that's gonna wrap it up, Brendan. It's late over where you are, and I think we have covered our racing, and hopefully we will not lose this one, and we'll be uploading it. So if you missed the stream, those of you who came into the stream late here, we thank you for joining us, or everyone for joining us. But if you came in late, you will be able to listen to the podcast to hear the parts you missed. So as usual, thank you. I'm doing this live, so it's a little bit different. Go like to put a message at the end of the show sometimes. Go find time_extend on Twitter and DM us if you want to be in the Discord, which is a very fun place to be. And all of the people here pretty much in these Twitch comments are members of our Discord, and we all enjoy the lovely racing game centric discussion that they enrich our lives with every single day. So go be a part of that, because it's a fun thing.
Yeah, and also if you do like the Twitch stream stuff, just get on our case to keep doing it. It is something that, you know what, we love the idea of it, and we have ideas for what we would do. It's just when it comes to this Twitch streaming stuff, it's a whole new world of production, and we always say any feedback's appreciated. So if you want to see more of this type of thing, or just more streams in general, then just let us know.
Yeah, just bug us, bother us, say mean things to us. They don't have to be mean, but it accentuates the effect of the message.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, thanks everyone so much, and yeah, hopefully we will be doing a live pod like this soon. But in any case, you'll hear from us again soon. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks very much, guys. Good night.